All right, we're back with another edition of the Ice Team podcast. I'm Jason Durham as your host today, and I am so blessed to be sitting next to Chuck Hasse here. We're not far from Leech Lake, and for those of you that know Chuck, which you should, because if you want somebody that is dialed in on Leech Lake fishing, I don't care if you're talking perch or walleyes or anything that swims in that water, Chuck has a vast background in Leech Lake. Chuck, thank you so much for being along today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, right now we're sitting, just a few miles from Leech Lake. There's a map of Leech right behind us, which the viewers probably can't see because it's starting to get dark. There's a thermometer outside that says, about 17 degrees right now?
Yep.
And your son's out in the woods hunting.
He's out hunting, and we're sitting in here talking fishing.
I like this because I'm not a hunter, and I'd rather be talking fishing than actually hunting or even thinking about hunting. But has he seen anything?
It's been a pretty slow season. He's definitely not given up. I think he maybe regrets passing on a couple deer that he saw right away early in the year that he maybe wishes he had another crack at now. So he's definitely diehard. He's out there in the snow right now.
Well, I think there's a lot of people from our area that are thinking the same thing because the hunting season's been tough, but I know everybody is looking forward to what's coming up, the ice. What's Leech looking like right now?
Yeah, if you look at the next 10-day forecast here, we actually have some single digits and highs in the low teens that I think are going to lock up a lot of the smaller lakes and some of even the bigger part of Leech Lake where it's shallow in the non-wind blown areas. So it amazes me every year how fast it happens, but we could be in for an early season here.
I was thinking the same thing, and of course, everybody in our area likes to talk about Red Lake. Well, everybody in the state, everybody in the Midwest likes to talk about Red Lake because it freezes so quickly. How does Leech differ in that regard and in the way that it freezes? Red is very, very shallow, so it caps over really quick and makes ice fast. Is Leech similar to that or a lot different?
Yeah, we're usually, I would say, a week to 2 weeks at least on the main basin of Leech Lake, the bigger part of the lake itself. I'd say we're right around that week to 10 days behind Red Lake. Walker Bay, the bay closest to town, is actually very deep. It takes the water a little bit longer to cool down in that part of the lake, so that's usually another week or so behind the main lake. But it wouldn't surprise me if Red locks up here in the next 5 to 7 days that we're maybe only a week behind that.
Yeah, and really, you talk about like Walker Bay, the effect of wind on that. You can have cold temperatures, but if you have winds blowing hard, it's not going to freeze.
Yeah, and it's a battle. It's kind of a cat and mouse game every year. You see it just start to skim over, and then we'll get a little bit of wind, and it'll open back up. We play that game, it seems like, for a couple weeks until we get 3 or 4 nights or days of single digits or low teens without much wind. It takes a little bit longer for that thing to lock up.
Well, there's probably, in my mind, I haven't been by the access lately, but I'm guessing there's still a few musky fishermen going out there.
There was a guy out there today. Yeah, I drove by this morning, and I'm not sure who you are, but if you're listening to this, you are definitely a diehard.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Well, before we get even deeper into Leech Lake, because I know a lot of our listeners venture here. How can't you? You've got one of the larger lakes in Minnesota and a great walleye fishery, great perch fishery, great everything fishery. But let's get a little background on you, Chuck. How many years have you been guiding on Leech? Really, what's your background? How did you end up where you are right now?
I grew up in west central Minnesota and fished a lot in the Otter Tail Lakes area. I went to college in Crookston and made a couple trips over this direction in my college days. And I don't know what it is about this lake or this area, but I can tell you the first time that I made the trip over here, I knew in the back of my mind that I would like to live here someday and start a family or, a business and kind of set down some things and get settled in. And well, that was over 20 years ago now. So that goal has been achieved.
How did you, to interrupt, how did you do that? How did you accomplish that?
Basically taking risks. I lived in Fargo for the first year or two after college and did the office deal, did my internship there, and then did a couple different jobs working in an office in Fargo, and just knew it wasn't for me. And every time I'd come back to this area, I kind of made it a goal, to find some type of an employment here, to basically start some roots, start a family, and from there it just kind of spiraled. I lived to fish, fished all the time. Through some in-laws, I was able to start guiding a little bit on the side, as they had a prior resort business and still had some customers coming up. And then from there, I started meeting some of the guys in the area, and I guess things just kind of took off on their own.
And it's definitely been an amazing career. I mean, if anybody's coming here, they're going to contact you. And I'm not just talking about somebody that's looking for a guide. I'm talking about people that are involved in the industry. Like we were just talking before the show about people that had reached out to you because they were going to come and film here. That's a common thing because of your experience here and how you understand the lake. Not to mention, you're out on this water a ton.
Yeah, it's I figure, the month of November there's not much action out there for me. Maybe the end or early April, but on average I would say I probably spend close to 300 days a year on this lake, whether it be on top of the ice or in a boat. So I've met a lot of great people. This lake has a lot of things to offer. It's a destination place. I've got to make a lot of great contacts over the years, including you, Jason.
Oh, well, thanks.
And as a fishing family, I kind of always call it a family. It's more like a second family. We kind of all take care of each other. We all kind of have the same goal in mind. So I'm always willing to help out, whoever contacts me for questions about the area. And at the same time, I know I can reach out to others too. So we kind of take care of each other in that regard.
Well, and the thing I love about just this community, about the Walker community, is that it's not simply Leech Lake. It's not simply you come here to fish. There's so many things to do. And whether you're looking at lodging or things for other people in your party to do, because not everybody wants to go fishing. We're entering the ice season. Not everybody wants to sit out on a frozen lake all the time. What are some of the other things that draw people to come visit the Walker area?
I mean, you take last year, for example, with the snow we had towards the end of the winter, and we had lots of snowmobile traffic. There's thousands and thousands of miles around here of snowmobile trails that are well groomed. You've got not just Leech Lake, but you've got Cass Lake just up the road, which is a great destination lake. You've got Winnie, which has really taken off not too far down the road. And not to mention lakes like Lake Bemidji. I mean, you could be to Lake Bemidji here for, 35 minutes down the road, or Plantagenet. You've got lots of options, and it kind of just gives you the Northwoods feel up here as well. So I think a lot of people from maybe the southern part of the state look at this as the Northwoods and kind of just a getaway where you can hunt, fish, snowmobile, lots of stuff to do outside.
And of course, if it's summertime, there's even more. I mean, that population just explodes. The Heartland Trail runs right through Walker, and the Paul Bunyan Trail takes off from here as well. Now, you mentioned a few different lakes, a few different bigger lakes, but there are tons, I mean, literally tons of these tiny bodies of water that people can explore as well.
Yeah, some of the smaller lakes around here, I mean, as you know, are the hidden gems. A lot of them are panfish and bass lakes. So a lot of them get overlooked just because of all the bigger lakes in the area. But there may be a day where you have a 30-mile-an-hour northwest wind,
Yeah.
and you're not going to want to go battle 3-4 foot waves on Leech Lake. So you might look to other options in the area. And usually you don't have to drive very far to find one.
Well, and if you just look at the size of the body water of Leech Lake, that if you're talking about a school of walleyes on that lake is typically going to be a lot larger than a school of walleyes on one of these 500-acre lakes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, numbers wise, it's maybe a little easier to stay on fish once you find them on these bigger bodies of water. The smaller lakes, I would say it's more of a quality than quantity type thing. But that being said, you may not have to travel very far to switch it up. I mean, you could be fishing walleyes, and 5 minutes later you could be fishing bass, or you could be fishing crappies. You don't have to drive to the other end of Leech Lake, say to Portage Bay from Walker Bay to fish bass versus walleyes or muskies. So there's kind of a little bit for everything in that regard.
I would totally agree. If somebody's coming to Leech, and if you haven't been to Leech, it's something you should definitely think about. Like I say, the Walker community is fantastic. The lake, though, it's gone through a lot of changes. If somebody has never been here and they're going to experience Leech Lake for the first time this winter, what are some key things that they should look for in terms of depth and structure to find specifically walleyes? And what should they definitely have in their tackle box?
Yeah, and a lot of that will come down to what time of year, where you're at on the lake, because it is so big. For example, if I'm fishing Walker Bay, typically that's going to mean a little bit deeper water.
Deeper water, yeah.
So you're fishing a lot of the mid base structure where you're fishing depths of say 25 to 35 feet. That's coming up out of 150 feet of water. When I'm doing that, I like to use small spoons, dead sticks, anything small. It just seems like those fish, there may be a few more numbers wise, but the overall quality may be a little less than if you were fishing Pine Point, Stony Point, the south end of the big lake, or Portage Bay. Those fish tend to run, at least in the winter, a little smaller in school size, but the quality seems to be there. They're a little bit shallower. They can be, had maybe with a little more aggressive tactic in that regard. So if you're fishing shallow water, especially say midwinter, I'm going to use a little more aggressive approach on the lake in the shallow water than I would as if I was fishing 35 feet on a hump in Walker Bay.
Okay, well let's look at Walker Bay just briefly. So you're going out, kind of early-ish part of the season, since we're almost there.
Yep.
And you're saying small spoons, a smaller presentation, dead sticks. What type of minnow are you putting on? Because I'm assuming you're using a minnow, not a waxworm or any other kind of crazy secret bait. You haven't kept leeches since September,
right,
that you're putting down the hole. What are you gravitating? You go into the bait shop. What are you asking for?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's got it in their head that they have to have shiners. It's just kind of we take calls all winter long of people coming up to use our rental houses. And one of the first questions asked is, where should I get bait? And on top of that, do they have shiners? I've seen a quality size fathead minnow or rainbow work just as well as a shiner. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily you got to have the most expensive, golden shiner, or river shiner, or anything like that, versus something that's actually going to swim and give that bait a little more action and profile. So I like to use a medium-sized rainbow or a bigger size fathead over shiners pretty much all winter long.
And I think a lot of people would find that, kind of unique, because there has been that push for shiners. You got to have shiners. I'm with you, Chuck. I like a fathead. I like a rainbow. I mean, sometimes if you can find them, red tails that are left over from the fall that, the bait shop's been feeding them and keeping them alive. I don't want those giant ones that I've been using in the fall.
The jigging size.
The jigging size.
Yep.
That's a good way of putting it. What about crappie minnows?
Yeah, crappie minnows. We're in a little bit of an uptick here with the perch population. So if you are in, say, you're fishing the main part of the lake where perch are very prevalent, the smaller the minnow, you're going to be fighting small perch pretty much nonstop. So really the only way to get around that is to bump up your size of bait, lure or minnow or both. Not saying crappie minnows won't work.
Right.
You're going to be awfully busy.
Yeah, and part of it too, when you're using crappie minnows, they're not easy to put on the hook.
Right.
I mean, I've got small hands, but large diameter fingers, and it's just kind of tricky to put them on. I don't like fiddling with that all the time. I want a minnow that I can actually grab onto. So it's partially about me too. But yeah, I think those listeners are really going to be surprised how, those two baits, fatheads and rainbows, compare to shiners and how they really perform well. So what I'm hearing anyway is that perch, if you wanted to get nice sized perch and good numbers of them, maybe Walker Bay is not the place to be, or is it the place to be?
Depends on time of year. Typically, we start seeing a pretty decent perch bite, say in the Grandview Flats area. If you're not familiar with Leech Lake, if you look at a map, there is an island almost dead center of the lake, and that is Goose Island. So that's where we base a lot of our rentals are on. And typically the perch bite starts to pick up maybe around the end of January, early February. And we'll chase them around until the end of February, or when walleye season is done. And then pretty much we focus on perch altogether. You start getting into late February, early March, locations like Sand Point, Cedar Point, and Walker Bay start to take off a little bit. Agency Bay on the north end, and Agency Bay is I would say it's a mini me of Walker Bay. It's deeper, it's got lots of structure, but those perch will tend to show up on the bigger flats, and usually those are on the north end of each of those bays. So they're cruising around looking for a bug hatch of any kind. Last year we had a lot of snow cover, so we noticed the fish weren't so much full of bugs, they were full of crayfish, and that seemed to be what the perch were keying on last year. And we actually, it took us a while, but when we did locate the perch around the end of January, they were in depths that we typically don't catch them in a normal winter. And the only thing I can think of is that they were solely keying on crayfish because that bug hatch really wasn't happening in full swing like it normally is.
So you said in a depth that you don't normally see them. What depth are we talking?
Anywhere from 16 to 20 feet, which doesn't sound deep, but for the main basin of Leech Lake, that's actually some of the deeper water that you're going to find in most areas.
Sure. I mean, would you say on Leech, when you get into the late part of the season, is there such a thing as too shallow?
No.
I think that's so cool.
No, and I mean, I've seen it where you think you're sight fishing, and all of a sudden, boom, you've got one of those 13 inch perch that have your jig in their mouth before you even notice they were coming because you're in that shallow water.
Well, it's kind of easy to get them up to the surface because you've got so much ice that once you get them turned up the hole, if you're using a smaller hole, which you should be if you're fishing for perch, they can't really turn around and get away.
There's only one way to go, and that's up.
Way to go. I love it. You've seen the perch population change a lot in terms of the size structure and the time that you've been here. Where's that at right now?
You know, it seems to be on, I would say the last couple of years now, on a bit of an uptick. And it's kind of funny because when the slot for walleyes was relaxed a few years ago. They figured that would have some effect on the numbers of perch in the lake. There's got to be an equal balance. You relax the slot on the walleyes, and that's going to have your effect on the numbers of yellow perch as their main forage source. That really hasn't happened. So some people are scratching their heads a little bit, but I think because of that explosion of rusty crayfish that we've had the last few years, the average size of the perch, the numbers are still there, and the average size of the perch is increasing maybe a little bit faster than they planned on. So that's a good thing.
We've talked a little bit about walleyes, and I do want to get back to walleyes. And we've talked a little bit about perch, but what about the other species in Leech that you're going to encounter ice fishing? I mean, obviously, muskies are a big deal out there. Bass, largemouth bass are a big deal out there, and you tangle with them ice fishing. But what about some of the panfish?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. That's what a lot of people are looking for, and they can be tough to find out there. There's traditional areas for panfish such as Shingabee Bay, kind of just south of Walker, that attaches to Walker Bay. Some of the north ends of the fingers, like Sucker Bay, Portage Bay, Steamboat Bay, have a little different variety of maybe river channels versus Steamboat Bay is more of a vegetation-based bay. You can find them in either. It's tough because a lot of what it comes down to is getting there.
Right.
So, anglers who are mobile and have a snowmobile that's capable of keeping them mobile on a year like last year are going to luck out, and a lot of times they're going to have these places to their own. To the average angler who's maybe riding out on their four-wheeler, and then once we get enough ice to drive out in your truck, they're not really going to put forth the effort to drive, say, 7-8 miles across the lake. And
without a plowed trail.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and even when you have a plowed trail, that can disappear in the matter of hours, as we found last year. But it's a hidden gem for panfish. The tough part is actually finding and staying on them consistently in the winter months.
And that's where those small lakes really come into play, because if somebody wants panfish, or let's be honest, you're probably better off going to a small body of water close by than putting in all the time and effort to locate those schools on Leech Lake during the winter.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, if you find them on Leech Lake, you will be impressed with the quality,
For sure.
as you know.
Yeah.
But if you're looking for action or numbers or, maybe a little more consistency, then that's when anglers are choosing some of the smaller lakes around the immediate area.
So we were talking about lake access a little bit, and I mean, last year was that was hard with all that snow. My gosh. But if anglers want to get out on Leech Lake, I mean, there are a lot of resorts that plow and maintain roads.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because, say, 10 years ago, there wasn't. And now you've got Trapper's Landing, you've got Acorn Hill and Brinley's, which is kind of the I'd say in the middle of the main basin. On the south side, you've got Anderson's Pine Point Resort, which is where we operate our rental business from. Walker Bay, you've got a couple different smaller outfits out there. You've got people who will, make their own roads here and there. But the most consistently plowed and maintained roads are on the main part of the lake.
Well, and that's a big deal because, I don't live very far from you over in the Park Rapids area. We don't have anybody that, keeps a road plowed and maintained just for the public to use for a fee.
Right.
You can't go to a resort that you would stay at in the summer and say, hey, can I pay to get on the lake? No, you can't, because there aren't any roads. The only roads we have are private individuals that want to put their own fish houses out. And then it just kind of, exponentially increases in width and length, those roads do. But how much time do you put into maintaining roads for your rentals? How many rentals are you running?
We have roughly 20 now.
Okay. So how much time are you spending? Of course, I know it depends on how much it's snowing, but I mean, this has to be an exhausting task.
Yeah, I would say roughly half the battle is maintaining roads, making roads to new areas, keeping those roads open. Um, Once someone comes, you may make a road one day and you may have a client who's staying for 2 days. And just maintaining that road, they need to be able to get in and out. So that means making sure the road is cleared when they get to the rental, keeping it cleared so that they can get to and from, and continuing on so that they can actually make it back. A lot of our houses aren't close to shorelines. They might be 6-7 miles out into the lake. So that is a huge obstacle. And along with that, if anyone's ever dropped a snowplow on a frozen sheet of ice, it's not all that easy on equipment.
No.
So a lot of that, I mean, you're going to have, it's not a matter of when, it's or if, it's when you're going to have a breakdown of some kind, or you're going to have to fix something or weld something. So yeah, now that I think about it, it's probably half to 3/4 of the battle is just maintaining roads and transportation to and from what we operate out of.
You know, I've thought about having some rentals over in our area because we really don't have anybody that does it and we've got so many lakes. But that's the part that really dissuades me from doing it is maintaining all those roads. And on small lakes, then I'd have to plow roads on numerous bodies of water. The other thing that is hard for me to think about, and I'm guessing it's probably hard for you too, is having people sleep out on the ice. They're sleeping in shelters that you've rented to them and just worrying about their well-being.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we take that everything into effect. As you know, we get extreme cold swings from time to time. So all of our sleeper houses are equipped with the carbon monoxide detector. The batteries are checked constantly. We have things like extra buddy heaters with 1-pound propane cylinders, so that if something does happen, someone gets up in the middle of the night and it's too warm in the house, so they turn the knob on the vented heater and they end up shutting it off. Well, they can't figure out how to get it lit again. They'll call us, and one of the first things I'll say is, look under the second cabinet. There's a buddy heater in there. There's a 1-pound canister hooked up to it with propane. Turn it to pilot. You know, you can coach them through getting that lit until we can get out there and fix something if need be. But yeah, it's a 24/7. I mean, once we put people into a sleeper fish house, you're on call. I mean, and that doesn't matter if you're at a son's basketball game or, you know, doing something with mom and dad. You're always taking a look at your phone just to make sure that there are no issues.
Have you ever gotten a call at like 2:30 in the morning?
Lots. Many.
So that's just another reason that I really don't ever want to do rentals. I mean, I think a lot of people have considered it over the years, even just their personal house. They go, oh, well, you know, I bought a wheelhouse and I could rent it out and it would make my payment on it, my loan payment. Maybe this isn't a bad idea, but there's a lot that goes along with it. And just that liability portion of it too.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot that, I mean, anyone who owns a wheelhouse knows how much it takes to use them, say, for the weekend.
Right.
You take that times 20, times 7 days a week, and something's going to happen, you know, at some point to one of those 20 houses, whether it's someone gets stuck or, you know, one of the houses is froze down and you're out there, you know, some of our houses are still skid houses and you're out there with 2-ton car jacks, you know, jacking up each side of the skids to try to get them to break loose and then dragging them across the lake. I mean, there's risk factors into all of that, but yeah, it's a constant battle. It's always exciting that first month to get out there and get everything established. But you run into a winter like we had last winter, And it was there was a lot of sleepless nights and replowing roads in the middle of the night when the wind would finally go down, and it's a lot of work.
Yeah, I think if anybody looks at the cost of a rental, if they're thinking, boy, that's expensive. It might be expensive for your budget, but in reality for what you're getting, it's cheap.
Yeah.
I mean, if you compared it to the cost of making that venture with your own equipment
Mm-hmm.
and experiencing a few of those breakdowns or just issues that arise, it is cheap.
Yeah, not to mention, I mean, we're moving our houses constantly. The last thing we want to have is a new customer. We bring them out to the house and it looks like it's been sitting there for 2 weeks. Typically on our weekends, we're usually booked full. Monday's house moving day, so we're moving houses Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. People who rent middle of the week are usually on fresh spots, and those are spots that are predetermined by us who's out there every day, and what's traditionally a good area in December versus a good area in February. So we're constantly moving them around. We're always trying to stay on top of whatever's happening out there. The last thing I want to do is walk in and check on a client and they've been sitting there, maybe they pull in at 2-3 o'clock on a Friday, and I'll check on them Saturday morning, and there's not much happening. That's not a good feeling for us. That's not what we're doing it for. So we make every effort to move things around and try to stay on top of stuff the best we can.
Well, I heard this quote years ago, and I've thought about it many, many, many times over the course of my career, and that is the biggest critic of the fishing guide is the fishing guide.
Correct. We're probably harder on ourselves than
100%.
most people think.
100%.
Yeah.
If you think, if you go, okay, I'm going to give them a little bit of flack, I tell you, the guide internally has done that 100 times over.
Absolutely.
And much, much more severely.
Absolutely.
They want you to have a good time. But when you're doing rentals, you're not guiding the groups.
Right.
There's a big difference there. But you're still giving insight and some coaching. You want people to catch fish.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, every group's different. You see people who come up that they're not all that worried about catching fish. They want to, they might be doing it for the first time and it's a new experience. And if they catch a couple, everything's gravy. You also get people who have huge expectations. And, anyone who talks to me, I usually let them know what the expectation is.
Yeah.
And if that area is not living up to the expectation, then we try to do everything to change that.
For sure. But you do some guiding on the ice, don't you?
Yeah, not as much anymore. Just with only 3 of us and the number of houses we have now and the busier we get each year, it has cut into that individual guiding time a little bit. If you take 1/3 of us out of the equation, there's 3 of us that own this business. You take 1/3 out and it puts twice as much work on the other 2. So there's kind of a balancing act there. A lot of it depends on conditions. Is this going to be an adventure where it's, quick and light travel, or is it going to be something that I can make a road to an area and get people set up comfortably and kind of hang out while doing some other things? So the actual guiding part, I have slowed down a little bit, but it is still an option.
Sure. And, for people wondering the difference that haven't experienced either, really, what is that expectation? Like, what should somebody expect if they're coming to rent a house versus hiring an individual guide?
Yeah, I mean, a rental is, we're going to have the houses in the best spots that we can possibly get to. Basically, you're going to show up to a house that's warm, holes are drilled, it's clean, everything's ready to go, but you do need to bring your own gear. So that's whether that's fishing gear, pots and pans. All of our sleepers have cooktops, ovens, usually an attached bathroom. A lot of them are wired for 110, so we can provide a generator to you if you need one, or you'd like to power any kind of electronics. If you want to bring your own and use that on your own, that's fine too. But it is kind of a situation where we will bring you to the house. We'll give you a quick rundown, kind of what's been happening, what's been working, and then it's kind of on your own. We'll check in on you, here and there. If you have any issues, we're usually not far away. But the guiding is more of a lighter, being more mobile, moving multiple times if we have to. Equipment is provided, baits provided, things like that.
What about apparel?
Yeah, that's again, it depends. If you want to show up to a rental and never walk outside, you're probably don't have to bring as much clothing as if you show up and say you want to set a couple tip ups up outside, or you want to bring your own portable and use the rental house as kind of your home base. But yeah, that's one of the things, and I know, and you can tell everyone prepare for the worst, and I would say maybe 50% maybe roughly is prepared for the environment they're going to be fishing in.
Yeah.
Somewhere around there.
It really goes back to experience. You can say, okay, dress like you're, going out winter camping. Well, people haven't winter camped. Go like you can't say dress like you're going to shovel your driveway if somebody lives in Missouri, because they're shoveling a couple inches of snow and they're getting really warm while doing it.
Right.
So, you really can't wear too many layers, but you can show up to a rental and you've got a lot of flexibility in terms of what to wear in relation to what you're going to do while you're there. But if they're hiring you to go out on a guide trip and you might be running here or there or wherever, then you got to step things up a little bit.
That's where apparel becomes huge. So layers, waterproofing, the last thing you want to do is get wet in any way, shape, or form. Because it's just not going to end well. Once you get wet, it usually goes downhill from there. So yeah, having the proper gear and apparel is monumental in that regard.
One of the things I mentioned in the seminars I've been giving this winter has been about limitations, angling limitations, and one of them I talk about is apparel. Apparel can limit you greatly in the amount of time you can spend outside being mobile. We keep talking about being mobile, which is crucial if you're chasing certain species or just to find the fish initially. But as guides, we can be limited by our clients too.
Right.
Because of their limitations with whether it's apparel or like if somebody comes to rent a fish house, you might have just this killer bite, but they don't have any experience and they show up with gear that really doesn't function very well or just not understanding fish behavior. And that can really limit how much they catch throughout their stay. So, you have to take it all and put it into perspective.
Correct.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the guide life, and then I want to talk some more about Walleyes on Leech. But you recently got married.
I did.
Congratulations. That's a big deal. So
thank you.
So Kayleen.
Yes.
She's had some experience with what it's like to have somebody in their family that guides.
Yeah, her dad has been a guide out here for around 40 years, and
just the 40.
Yeah, just a short time. And his running joke was all he needed was a couple more waypoints out of me, and then she could leave me. So yeah, it's been pretty cool in that regard. I these guys that have been doing it a lot longer than me, I have a ton of respect for. A lot of those guys were doing it before you had the nice apparel. You had the great electronics. You had the bigger boats. You had GPS. There was a lot more that went into it than maybe we kind of take for granted now. So that was a cool experience. I've got to know Jim very close now the last few years, but yeah, she's been through the game. She knows what it takes, and that's what makes it work.
And Kayleen's dad is legendary Leech Lake guide Jim Flesh. When you first moved to the area, Did you look up to some of those guides? Were there certain Leech Lake guides that you thought, oh man, like I really hope I run into this person. Like that guy's a legend. You got a little starstruck when you
Yeah.
got to chat with them the first time. Who were some of those people? Well,
Uh,
I mean, you're obligated to say Jim Flesh now, but
yeah. I mean, even for me, I mean, I had stars in my eyes, just anyone who could catch fish on this lake before I really got to learn it. Something as simple as going into Shriver's bait shop, and Jack Shriver, senior or junior, was working, and would notice you, or that you fished a lot, or they'd kind of just carry on a conversation with you, or ask how fishing was, and they'd kind of say the same thing, and you'd walk out of there and you'd be like, oh man, Jack Shriver just talked to me,
right.
and he guides out here all the time, and I want to be like him someday. But the Shrivers, Harv Leak,
Yeah.
Almas, these guys that have been, doing it, and I've seen on TV doing it, and then I actually have now, met them and become friends with them, and even done trips with them. It's kind of crazy to see how everything's kind of come full circle.
And I think some people can just assume, like, as these legends age, that they go, oh, you know what? Maybe they're not as sharp in their game, or they're not on the cusp of the advancements in technology or whatever it is. And I guarantee you spend some time with them, and you go, I am absolutely dumbfounded at how much information you know, how much I've learned from you just in spending minutes with them. Can you imagine?
Anytime any one of those guys, and that's just a short list. Anytime any one of them would open their mouth and start talking about fishing, I mean, I was making mental notes. And some of the things that they used to do to catch fish that, maybe we necessarily don't do anymore. Sometimes you go back to those things.
For sure.
And you hear stories, and, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But any info you can gain, whether it be, listening to someone who's got 40 years experience on the lake, or listening to a podcast, or, finding information online, looking at maps, all of that goes into play for the overall outcome of how successful you'll be.
For sure. And even if you didn't spend time with somebody that was a 40-year veteran of guiding, if you knew somebody in your community that had spent 40 years fishing a body of water, you're going to learn something from them.
100%. I know multiple anglers who live around me that, they'd fish 4 or 5 days a week, and they were always catching fish when I couldn't, when I first moved here. And a lot of times they'd be putting their boat in at 4 or 5 in the morning, and they'd be leaving about the time everyone else was putting their boat in. Well, what does that tell me? I'm late to the party most days. So it doesn't matter who it is. There's lots of great anglers on every one of these big bodies of water that have the experience that just a lot of people don't have.
For sure. Well, let's get back to the walleyes, because I know when people talk about Leech Lake, walleyes is the first thing that comes to mind. Well, perch sometimes too, or muskies sometimes, or bass sometimes.
And now smallmouth bass.
Smallmouth bass. Boy, they have exploded in that fishery. But a lot of people that come, especially for ice angling, are looking specifically for walleyes. And there are a couple key things that everybody asks before they go on a trip. They start reading the fishing reports. They start calling bait shops. They want to know what depth, what color, those kind of basic things, what area of the lake. So as we look at first ice coming, what are some of those predictions you can make? Because there's some that you can't determine until we actually get to that point. Oh, they're biting in this depth, this area, whatever. But there are some things that are general that carry over year to year out on Leech. And what are some of those things that you can pass on to the listeners?
Yeah, I mean, and again, if you break down Leech Lake into almost 2 separate bodies of water, one being Walker Bay, one being the main basin, it's going to have a different story to each. Walker Bay, when it first freezes over, you can walk 15 feet off the shoreline from Chase on the Lake,
Yep.
or one of the marinas, the public access in town, and have great fishing on the first break line that leads into deep water. As you get into later on, as the ice gets thicker, the oxygen maybe becomes a little less, a little more traffic. Those deeper water areas are typically going to be a little more productive than the shorelines. The shorelines will see a lot of traffic. The fish tend to eventually kind of leave those shorelines where they may have set up for the fall and head to other structures. Now, if you're talking the main basin on Leech, I can honestly tell you that if you hear someone say you have to be in 12 feet of water, or you have to be using a green jig with a golden shiner, they're lying. There's so much of the same area out there. It's little things, vegetation in areas where there isn't vegetation for miles. That might mean they might be in 7 feet in February.
Right.
It might mean they're in 10 feet. It's the fish tend to roam on the main basin just because so much of the lake is the same. So a lot of times it's traditional areas, and those big schools that we see in the fall that will line up on shoreline points and stuff kind of tend to disappear throughout the winter. So it's more of a slow but steady, and not a 15-minute window on Pine Point in 10 feet of water. You might sit there for 3 hours in the evening and you might catch 2 fish the first hour, 1 the second hour, and 2 fish the third hour. It's the fish are almost nomadic. So as they're cruising, you just try to keep picking them off the best you can.
But you do hear that a lot, that generalization of 12 feet of water, green jig.
Yep. Well, if you said 12 feet of water on Leech Lake, on the main basin, you'd be talking about roughly 80% of the entire water column.
Right,
so.
Exactly. Well, and that's something that's intimidating for a lot of people in even going to Leech Lake for the first time, because they go, oh man, that lake is so huge. And I hear stories about it. I mean, the first step to do in taking a trip out there would be to simply drive up to the shoreline.
Yeah.
Drive up to an access and look out there. And it's not as imposing as you would think. But for those people who are thinking, oh, it's too much, it's too big, it's too much to think about, there's too much area to break down and figure out, what advice could you give them about making their initial venture?
Break it down into small parts. Break it down into small parts and get to learn those parts, because the reality is every part of the lake has fish at some given point in time. And if you can start dissecting small parts of the puzzle, eventually you're going to put the puzzle together. And a lot of times you might find something that's working on, say, the west side of the lake, that you can look at a map and go, well, and this area up in Portage Bay looks almost identical to this area on the southwest side of the lake. Why wouldn't it work here? And you start putting the pieces of the puzzle together, and that's when it becomes a little more clear. But you're right. You look at it and it can be intimidating. And, you can go out there and just wing it, or you can go out and try to learn every time you fish an area, try to learn it. Why are the fish there? Why aren't they there? Is there bait? What's the depth structure? I mean, everyone's got, lake maps and GPS now. So, just putting those little pieces of the puzzle together will pretty much for sure help you in the end overall result.
In the summer months when we're fishing open water, wind is a big factor. I don't want to say an issue because, well, I mean, it's an issue to some degree, but it's a factor. If you have dead, calm, flat water, it's going to be a tough bite, typically. Okay. If you get too much wind, it's a safety issue.
Right.
Where does wind fall into the equation when it's covered with ice?
It's going to, if anything, it makes our job tougher as guides. or business owners of rental houses, resort owners, in keeping the roads open. It doesn't seem to dictate fish location too much during the winter. I would say that's more dictated on what the fish in the area are feeding on. But take, for example, last year, we had over 25 miles of plowed ice roads.
Oh my gosh.
And you plow the road a certain direction, you pile the snow up on, the rule of thumb is the south or the east side, because we predominantly have a west or northwest wind. So that will keep the drifts from drifting over your roads. Well, insert last winter, where the wind would blow out of the west for a couple days. Then it would switch around and blow out of the east for a couple days. Then it would blow out of the north for a couple days. So we were constantly building new roads, finding new places to get to new areas and what the safest and easiest route was to get there. So if anything, I guess it would just make our job a little bit harder.
Do you ever, after plowing, do you ever close a road because of like flooding or ice heaves? That's a big thing. Pressure ridges.
Yes.
Okay. And how would you close? How do you close the road? Do you just plow a big bank up at the end of it, or
you'd plow it shut? Old roads are typically, you can kind of tell what's a fresh plowed road versus an old road. We do have maps. We put out usually weekly updates of our road system on our website and on social media. But if you see a road that's drifted over, generally that's not an occupied road. And more than likely those drifts are super hard. Mm-hmm. And you're going to get super stuck trying to cross them. I don't care how big of a truck you have, what kind of a tire you have on your truck. Everyone at times thinks they're invincible. And those are always the worst ones to have to get in and get them back out of a certain situation. So you can tell what road is maintained most of the time, unless you're in the middle of an all-out blizzard.
My guess is, since you guys are plowing roads and know where they lay, where everything goes, without a map, that sometimes if there's an issue, maybe somebody local, maybe it's another guide. I'm guessing you get some calls for help.
We've been on many rescue missions, and that's the nice thing is we kind of all work together. Everyone helps each other out in a time of need. It may depend on who's got the biggest plow, who's available at a certain time, but we all try to work together. And you never want to see anyone in a bad situation. So, does it happen? Yes. Generally, does the end result come out smoothly? I mean, we can usually get to you in some way, shape, or form. It probably happens every other day once we get, over that foot of snow, 12 to 15 inch snow threshold. That's when you start seeing things like that.
Sure. I mean, if you're dealing with the elements, at some point,
right,
you're going to get stuck. You're going to have a breakdown. It's just part of the game.
We get stuck all the time.
Yeah. Having a jerk strap in the back of the truck is just mandatory.
Yes.
And that should be really, if you are anywhere in the Midwest that has snow at all.
Correct.
You should have those tools along. Well, after all of these years of doing guiding, of having the rentals, I'm guessing you have a story or two about people that have come and stayed in the fish houses, maybe a big catch or something unique that has happened out on the water. What's something that stands out in your mind?
Oh, I mean, yeah, there's certain situations that, probably shouldn't be told, but, you
and I both experienced that, where there's some stories that, oh man, people would love to hear them. You'd love to bring down the house, but you also, you don't want to make fun of somebody.
No.
You want to.
I would say my
really
favorite is, say people not from the area. I've taken people from all over the world fishing. The thought to some people of driving a vehicle on the ice is just borderline insanity.
Yep.
And I would say I get the most enjoyment out of the reactions of some of these people who've never ice fished or even seen a frozen lake before. Um, 2 years ago, we had a bunch of pipeliners. Well, the pipeline was going through that were renting a cabin right on the shoreline there at Anderson's Pine Point, where we go out of. They were all from Texas. And I got to talking to them one night when we were out there. It was early in the year, and we were just checking ice. And the one guy said, "You know, I'm gonna get a hold of you here. Let me know when the ice is safe." And I ran into him a few weeks later, and they actually, I mean, because they were basically living there at the resort, they rented a fish house from us for the full month of January. And they had the absolute time of their lives. It was comical though to we'd stop in at the house, make sure the heat was still on, fill the propane, things like that, and we'd go in and just to see some of the lures and different options. I mean, because they didn't know they were doing it, you know, maybe in a couple hours spare time that they
Right.
had, but to them it was a new experience. And you know, I remember it was over Christmas break, and one of those guys, he brought his family up from Texas. And every morning when I pulled out onto the lake, the house that we had for them wasn't too far out from shore. I could see a sled sitting, a little red sled sitting right outside the door. And that little red sled was an 8-year-old boy from Texas who walked from the cabin out to the fish house to fish every morning.
No way. That's awesome.
And I happened to be driving by one day, and I look over, and here's this 8-year-old. He actually had a really sweet mullet. Not that that adds anything to the story, but it was just cool seeing him run down.
Yeah.
He's running down the ice road, pulling this sled, and I can see there's a fish in there. And I thought, man, he must have caught a big eel pout or a big pike or something. And the closer I got, you know, I slowed down and made sure he could see me coming down the road, and I pulled up next to him. And here he had, it was a 28, 29-inch walleye. And he was so proud of that. He was running as fast as he could back up to the cabin to show his dad what he had caught. And I said, "What you got there?" And he goes, "I don't know. I think," he goes, "is that a walleye?" I said, "Yep, that's a walleye." And he said, "Is that a big one?" I said, "Bigger than anything I've seen out here in the last month and a half." So, yeah, the new experiences and new people into the action or the industry, I would say that maybe brings you some of the more unique things you see. But yeah, whether it be ice or open water, there's all kinds of different experiences.
And I totally agree with you, especially in that regard of taking somebody out who's never done it before. Even walking on a frozen lake, you know, driving's a total different thing.
Yep.
But, you know, would they start getting the camera out?
Yep.
And you couldn't tell from a picture.
No.
You can't tell from a picture if
And
you're on a lake or in a
You
field.
can
but-
almost watch them digress slowly as, you know, you're out there longer, and then they'll say things like, "Well, maybe I'd like to drill a hole with the
Yeah.
auger," you know, something
Yeah.
like that, to say I drilled a hole in the ice, or, you know, things like that. And just to see the new experiences, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I've had that multiple times, and take videos of
Yep.
them running the auger.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so much easier now too with electric.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, gas augers, that was a different story, because
Right.
even just the sound of a gas auger for somebody that's never run one before is a little bit intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
And you think it might rip my arms off or cut my feet off,
Mm-hmm.
which it's not going to do if you're doing it the right way.
Right.
So if we get a couple weeks down the road and Leech freezes, what's going to be the first excursion that you take out there? What are you going to look for? What are you going to target?
Well, as you know, it's kind of been somewhat of an irregularity, but we've actually had a really good burbot bite the first few weeks of the season, and which is kind of abnormal for where our houses are usually located first ice, and that's becoming more and more popular. You know, right away we try to get out to maybe the first break lines of 10, 11 feet. on the main lake, and keep working our way out from there. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's always, if I'm out there chasing anything on leech, it's pretty much always walleyes. So trying to catch a quality group of fish, I guess you could say.
Do you find yourself looking for more of like the eater size fish, or are you always like, am I going to get my personal best today?
It depends. If I'm fishing by myself, I could care less if I catch a fish or not.
Same.
A lot of times. So then I'm probably more geared towards quality.
Sure.
If I got my 15-year-old boy with, he's gonna want to catch his 4 walleyes and bring them home and eat them that night. So then we're probably gonna try a little bit, maybe a different area for smaller eater size fish. So it just depends on the situation.
Well, and talking about those bigger fish, what Chuck hasn't shared is that he is definitely an icon when it comes to catching big fish on leech. I mean, it would take me a long time to go through the list of all of the tournaments that you've either won or placed high in. It's lengthy. And he modestly sits here and just kind of goes, yeah. If somebody wants to catch a big walleye, a legitimately big walleye, something bigger than they've ever caught, and this is why I like Leech Lake better than, say, Red Lake. And Red Lake's an amazing fishery. It's an amazing place to go to ice fish. But on Leech, you can catch some giants that you don't see on places like Red Lake.
Yeah, and it hasn't always been that way. Up until, I guess, the reality is a lot of these bigger fish we're catching now are stocked fish.
Sure.
From the 2000 era. And as you know, it takes a long time to develop a big fish. Now, some places are different. Lake Erie, you might have a 5-6 pound fish that's only 2 or 3 years old. On Leech Lake, it seemed like we battled a threshold of 26 inches was a big fish just not that many years ago.
Right.
And we've kind of taken that next step now to where we're seeing a 30-incher occasionally. A 27, 28-inch fish is totally attainable, if you're fishing the right areas. And, a lot of it comes down to just location, keying in on what those bigger fish are eating, and then how to target them, when to target them, what to use. A lot of times for the bigger fish, it doesn't become bait specific. As you know, when a big fish decides to eat, it's going to eat.
It's going to eat.
So it doesn't have to be something super specific in your technique. More often than not, it comes down to area and timing.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And when you're talking about timing, some of these big bodies of water, after dark is just non-existent in terms of catching fish.
Right.
You can catch fish all day long, walleyes all day long, and then as soon as the sun goes down, it's over.
Yep.
What's Leech like?
It can be a little of both, and that's Leech Lake is like no other in the winter. It is probably the toughest lake to pattern in the winter of any lake I've ever fished. There will be things that surprise me every year. We actually found the perch bite last year from a group of renters that had rented from us the year before. And, they kind of politely asked if they could be in the same area. And, it was the same time of year. And we were actually in the area anyway. So we helped them out with that. And the next day I checked on them, and the house was located in, we'll say, 12 feet of water, 11 feet of water. And they had, it was nothing, zip, nothing. But they had a portable setup maybe 50 yards away where it broke into 16 to 18 feet. And the first question they asked was, how hard would it be to move this house? And I said, well, it's going to take some time. We had snow and all that. They said, well, we're not catching anything here, but in the portable, we absolutely pounded the big jumbo perch yesterday and caught a couple bonus walleyes. And that threw me for a loop because typically perch on Leech Lake are shallow water bug feeders. Well, with the amount of snow last year, like we talked about before, we slowly began to realize that all these tiny crayfish that these perch were eating were all in deeper water. So we were fishing areas like the middle of trenches where it would drop into 16 to 22 feet, where we would never dream of putting fish houses in the past. That's where we ended up having all of our houses for the last remainder month of the year. So it's always, like we go back to before, you're always learning, you're always listening, you're always paying attention, because about the time you think you have it figured out, you have nothing figured out.
That's absolutely right. I remember you telling me about that group, and I was shocked too. But what I always say is you can never say always or never with fish,
Right.
because at some point you're going to be proven wrong. Oh, the walleyes always do this. The perch always do this. They're going to prove you wrong.
Right.
And you and I are going to learn more this year, I'm sure.
Yeah.
What are you most excited for this upcoming season?
It's always exciting when the seasons change. After doing a bigger number of open water trips for the year, I got some hunting in and got a little break from fishing. But now I'm excited again, and each beginning of new year is exciting to see what's going to happen. Are we going to have snow? Are we going to have lots of ice? Are we going to have good ice? We knock on wood that those things happen. But then just kind of seeing how the whole thing plays out. 2 winters ago, we drove around on the lake everywhere without plows on our trucks.
Yeah.
Last year, you couldn't go 5 feet without a plow on your truck. So it's always a new adventure. Everything's constantly changing, and just gaining experience. Every year you seem to pick up on something that helps become a better angler.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Well, Chuck, before we depart, is there anything else you'd like to share with the listeners in terms of ice fishing this upcoming season? Anything new that's on your mind?
Yeah, I mean, first off, everyone have a safe hard water season. There's always new technology out there that's going to help people maybe make shorter work of their experience, or having a successful experience, whether that's a new auger or a new graph of some sort. I guess I keep going back to, the more you can advance yourself as an angler, whether it be electronics or clothing or mobility, that's going to help you in the long run. And, I wouldn't say there's one specific thing or one topic that, I would pick out, but just the overall experience of things in a whole in the winter, and just using that to help you down the road.
And not to mention, just more time with a rod in the hand is always beneficial.
Right, exactly.
For sure. Well, Chuck, if anybody was interested in a rental, booking a guide trip, or just reaching out to say, hey, what's happening, how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, we have a website. It's leechlakefishhouserental.com. I know that's a super original name, isn't it? Nothing flashy there. We do have social media. We're not particularly into Instagram or anything like that yet, but we do have a Facebook page, and that's just Leech Lake Fish House Rentals. If you search that in, you'll find our business. Give it a like. We provide fishing reports on there. We provide fishing reports to the chamber each week, and not only fishing reports, but ice updates, snow updates, road updates, things like that. So you can always call me on my cell. My cell is 218-289-1383. Or just like I said, give us a look on the website or social media, and you can find out how to get a hold of us there.
And of course, if people are looking for lodging in the area too, you can always go to the Leech Lake Chamber website. They can steer you in the right direction. There's a lot of wonderful resorts here, hotels, a lot of things to do in the Walker area. So it's not just fishing, though that's why I'd come here.
Correct.
Well, this is Jason Durham for the Ice Team Podcast. Thanking Chuck Hasse here for spending the night with me. And make sure to check us out on several different podcast availabilities, and follow the Ice Team Podcast and follow Ice Team on Facebook and Instagram for tons of updates. We have tons of everything ice related and beyond. This is Jason Durham reminding you to be safe, be smart, and be a hero. Take someone fishing.